Your daughter, your daughter's eyes is just like, you just, like black pools, you know what I'm saying?
Count three, we have guilty. Count three is guilty for the transportation.
Inside that courtroom, Jesse, it was so quiet. I would say you could hear a pin drop, but really all you could hear were the sounds of...
Count three, guilty. That's how the courtroom fell silent. The words echoed like a bomb dropping because Sean Diddy Combs, the man who built a billion-dollar empire off his name, was just found guilty of a federal crime. And that was just the beginning. We're talking about one of the most powerful men in music, now facing 20 years in prison. The headlines are calling it justice. The streets are calling it karma. But behind all that, there's a story the media isn't telling you. Because while Diddy was convicted, he also walked free on some of the most explosive charges. So what really happened behind those courtroom doors? Who got justice and who was left behind? And the real question, will Diddy serve time, or will he vanish before the sentence ever hits? Let's break it down.
So here's where things get messy.
Diddy wasn't just on trial for one bad decision. He was facing a laundry list of accusations, 5 federal charges in total. Some of them were serious enough to put him behind bars for life. We're talking about allegations of trafficking, coercion, and running a full-blown criminal enterprise. But somehow, he walked away from most of it. The jury cleared him of the most serious charges. No guilty verdict on the RICO counts. According to the court, there just wasn't enough proof that he ran an organized criminal network. That means all those assistants, employees, bodyguards, and so-called enablers who were part of the testimony, none of it added up to a criminal enterprise in the jury's eyes. Even after 6 weeks of testimony, even after 34 witnesses took the stand, even with former employees and alleged victims sharing chilling details, he was still acquitted on 3 of the 5 charges. And that's what shocked everyone. Because when you hear that kind of testimony, when you see law enforcement officers and former assistants telling the same disturbing stories, it's hard not to wonder, what more did the jury need? But while the government failed to prove a criminal empire, there were still 2 charges that hit harder than anyone expected.
While Diddy managed to dodge the RICO bullet,
He couldn't outrun everything. 2 charges stuck, and they weren't minor. He was found guilty of violating the Mann Act, a federal law originally meant to stop human trafficking and forced intimacy across state lines. In plain terms, he was convicted of transporting women, specifically Cassie Ventura and another woman known only as Jane Doe, for purposes that no one consented to. Let that sink in. This wasn't a technicality. This wasn't some vague business misstep. These convictions were rooted in disturbing testimony. Cassie's story alone painted a brutal picture of power, control, and fear. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was, in her words, trapped. Witnesses described physical altercations, manipulation, and being moved around like property. And when the jury heard all of that, they drew the line. 2 guilty verdicts, count 3 for Cassie, count 5 for Jane Doe. These weren't just names in court papers. They were women who stood up against a man who once seemed untouchable. And here's the part that matters. Each of those convictions carries a possible 10-year prison sentence. That's 20 years total. So, while Diddy and his legal team were busy celebrating what they called a win, the clock started ticking on the prison time he could soon be facing. But one victim's testimony hit harder than the rest, and without her, there might not have been any conviction at all. If there's one name that changed everything in this trial, it's Cassie Ventura. Long before the courtrooms, the headlines, or the guilty verdicts, Cassie was the one who cracked the silence. Her lawsuit was the spark that set Diddy's empire on fire, and when she took the stand, everything shifted. Cassie didn't just tell her truth, she exposed a world of control, isolation, and fear. She spoke of being forced into situations she never consented to, of being manipulated, broken down, and moved around like she belonged to someone else. It wasn't just emotional abuse, it was psychological warfare. And it wasn't just her word. Witnesses confirmed parts of her story. One described seeing Diddy push, punch, and kick her during a violent outburst in a hotel. Another overheard a phone call where an employee sounded terrified while being forced to go along with Diddy's demands. Her voice echoed through every part of this case, and when the jury found Diddy guilty on count 3, that was Cassie's count, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a moment of recognition. Of all the stories told, hers mattered enough to break through. But even with that, the truth is, it was only part of the story. Because while Cassie got some justice, others weren't so lucky. And for them, the verdict felt like a slap in the face.
For every charge that stuck,
There were others that slipped through the cracks. And behind those were real people who now have to live with the silence. Kid Cudi's name came up again and again. Remember the story? His car exploded in front of his house. The implication? A direct warning. Witnesses tied the incident back to Diddy, but no charges ever came from it. Not even a real investigation. And in court, it was barely a blip. Then there's Mia, a former assistant who allegedly endured physical abuse at the hands of Diddy. Her story was graphic, her account lined up with others. But without the trafficking charges or RICO sticking, her pain was treated like an afterthought. And these weren't the only names. Over the course of the trial, dozens of stories surfaced. Women, employees, industry insiders, all describing a culture of fear, intimidation, and silence. But because the jury didn't find enough to convict on the broader conspiracy, those voices were effectively shut out. It left many asking, how can someone be guilty of using power to exploit women, but not guilty of orchestrating it? How can there be victims, but no system behind the abuse? The verdict gave Cassie and Jane Doe justice, but for the rest, it felt like a system that blinked and then looked away. Still, Diddy isn't walking free, not yet, because the next phase could put him behind bars for decades.
now that the verdict is in,
The clock is ticking, and Diddy's freedom is hanging by a thread. He was found guilty on 2 federal counts. Each one carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, which means Diddy could be staring down 2 full decades in prison. And yet, there's still a chance he walks out of this with far less. His lawyers are already playing every card they have. They've requested $1 million bail, claiming Diddy should be allowed to return to his waterfront mansion in Miami while awaiting sentencing. Their pitch? He's already spent a year behind bars, he's not a flight risk, and he just wants to rest. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They fired back hard, asking the judge to keep Diddy locked up until sentencing. Why? Because they believe he could vanish. With his resources, escaping isn't just a theory, it's a very real possibility, and they're right to be nervous. If anyone could pull it off, it's him. A private jet, a remote island, a name that still holds weight in global business. It wouldn't be hard for someone like Diddy to disappear into luxury and never be seen again. The judge hasn't ruled on bail yet, but he gave prosecutors a few hours to submit a formal letter explaining why Diddy should remain behind bars. That hearing? It's already making headlines. And here's the part that really has people talking. If Diddy is sentenced to 20 years, he might still not serve all of it. Good behavior, legal appeals, or quiet backroom deals could easily cut that time in half or more. But before we talk escape plans and legal loopholes, we need to address what everyone's really thinking.
let's be honest,
This isn't some broke defendant waiting for a public defender to save him. This is Sean Diddy Combs, a billionaire with global connections, private planes, yachts, offshore accounts, and absolutely no desire to spend 20 years in a concrete box. And social media knows it. The second the guilty verdict dropped, the internet exploded with one question. Is Diddy gonna run? And it's not a crazy theory. In fact, it's exactly what most people in his position would at least consider. Think about it. One quick boat ride from Miami, and he could be sipping cocktails in the Bahamas. Or a red-eye jet to a country with no extradition treaty, somewhere with luxury, legal protection, and no courtrooms. He's got the money, he's got the connections, and most importantly, he has every reason to run. The courtroom saw him on his knees, head buried in his arms, practically praying after the verdict. That wasn't just exhaustion, that was panic. He knows what's coming. His public persona is shattered, the music industry has dropped him, and the world is watching. This is no longer about damage control, it's about survival. And yet, here's the twist. If he runs, it confirms everything people feared about the powerful escaping justice. But if he stays, the legal system still has to decide what to do with him. And that could be even worse, because while the court of law gave its verdict, the court of public opinion is just getting started.
The verdict may have been read in a courtroom,
But the real trial? It's playing out online. Within hours, social media was flooded with hot takes, outrage, relief, and straight-up disbelief. Some people celebrated. Others felt betrayed, and many were just confused. One person wrote, "He should have got life. We all know he's going to come after everyone who testified." Another added, "I don't even think he'll do prison time. He'll be out in 2 years or less. Just watch." And then there were the inevitable comparisons. This is OJ all over again, another injustice for the victims. We saw what happened, and he still walked on the worst charges. To make things worse, some media outlets ran headlines saying Diddy was not guilty, ignoring the fact that he was still convicted of serious federal crimes. That only fueled the confusion. People started parroting it in comments. "He beat the case. He's innocent." But here's the truth. He didn't beat the case. He dodged part of it. Yes, he was acquitted of the RICO and trafficking charges. But guilty on 2 counts means Diddy is still a convicted felon. And that label? It's not going away. The fallout is already in motion. Brands have cut ties. Sponsorships have dried up. His public image is radioactive. He's no longer the untouchable mogul flashing a peace sign at awards shows. He's a man waiting to be sentenced for crimes that could keep him behind bars for decades. And even if he gets out early, the trust is broken. The public's done. But with all the chaos, one question still lingers. Was this justice, or just another rich man slipping through the cracks?
so where does that leave us?
Diddy's trial was a roller coaster of emotions, a tangled web of accusations, testimonies, and legal battles. In the end, he was found guilty on 2 counts, but acquitted on the most serious charges. That's not a full victory for justice, but it's not a free pass either. Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe got some measure of justice, and that matters. Their voices were heard, and the court acknowledged their suffering. But for many others, the verdict feels like a warning sign that power and influence can still shield you from full accountability. Will Diddy serve decades in prison, or will he navigate the legal system to minimize his sentence or even escape it altogether? That story is far from over. One thing is clear. This isn't just about one man's fate. It's a glimpse into a system struggling to hold the powerful accountable, a society wrestling with justice and privilege. So what do you think? Was this verdict enough, or just a reminder that the rich play by different rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be there with you. Because the truth is, this saga isn't finished, and neither is the fight for justice.